Stormy Daniels has been written about now for like 8 years. And yet, this case in New York City, they now have her on the witness stand. I think soon there will be cross-examination. The Trump team has requested a mistrial because they said she testified to many different things that she otherwise should not have been able to be involved in. And so all of this is a huge mess as you break it all down. So the reason why I bring it up is, to me, this case is going to get tossed. The law on it is crazy, and I don't even think it's being talked about enough. This is a misdemeanor bookkeeping charge that has been elevated to a felony based on an as yet undefined and unproven second crime, which allows Alvin Bragg to turn a misdemeanor, which, by the way, is outside the statute of limitations, into a felony. This is occurring despite the fact that in over half of his cases as DA, Alvin Bragg actually drops felonies to misdemeanors. It's virtually unheard of for Alvin Bragg, who is an incredibly soft on crime district attorney, to be elevating any misdemeanor to a felony. So this is a big part of the discussion in general. But to me, what this also reflects is the complete failure of the media to even explain the most basic elements of this issue. Katie, we got details on my schedule here that I'm going to share with Katie. So we don't have to be there for the ad call. You guys don't always know. My days are just one series of fire drill after another. When you do as much live media as I do, I started off the day with live media. I think this is like the 6th different show that I've already done today. I did Piers Morgan's show earlier. I've got Hannity theoretically tonight. I'm going to do like 7 or 8 different shows. I got advertiser calls. Every day is just an absolute frenzy. Sidebar there. And everything must happen right now. This is what live media is like. It would be an interesting behind-the-scenes story for you guys to see sometime what actually goes on when it comes to putting on 3 hours a day of live radio, this show, all the content that OutKick does, all of the additional shows and responsibilities and obligations. But on the Stormy Daniels front, I wanted to read this. She's told so many different stories over the years that discerning what the actual truth is virtually impossible at this point because, again, she has said so much that has been proven to be untrue. And let me hit you with this. On January 30th, 2018, Stormy Daniels released this official statement. To whom it may concern, over the past few weeks, I've been asked countless times to comment on reports of an alleged sexual relationship I had with Donald Trump many, many, many years ago. The fact of the matter is each party to this alleged affair denied its existence in 2006, 2011, 2016, 2017, and now again in 2018. I am not denying this affair because I was paid, quote, hush money, as has been reported in overseas-owned tabloids. I am denying this affair because it never happened. I will have no further comment on this matter. Please feel free to check me out on Instagram at @TheStormyDaniels. January 30th, 2018. She now, having told like 5 or 6 different stories, is testifying that she actually did have a sexual relationship with Trump when he was a private citizen. Now, this goes to the essence, and this is why I think at least one juror might be persuaded by this argument. You might be like, okay, what exactly are you arguing here? Alvin Bragg's entire harebrained legal scheme relies on the fact that they are trying to elevate a misdemeanor to a felony, a bookkeeping misdemeanor to a bookkeeping felony, based on what is, relatively speaking, a violation of something having to do with election codes. Not state election codes necessarily. Maybe. We don't know because the exact second crime hasn't been explained. But that this was a felony because essentially they were trying to hide the fact that this happened. Remember, hush money is not illegal. Trump actually paid hush money for something that is reportedly untrue, which was that he had fathered a child illegitimately, that somebody was trying to sell that story. Trump paid for that story not to go public. And that's why I come back to this argument, and it actually seems to me very legitimate. As rich as he is, if Trump knew that somebody was going to allege that he had a sexual relationship with them, even if it was not true, he might be willing to pay to avoid family embarrassment, as he did for the alleged story about the child that was not his from out of marriage. In other words, he had paid to keep a false story before from going public. I'm not sure whether or not he slept with Stormy Daniels. I don't particularly care. But there is a strong argument that this was not done based on the election, that this was done because Trump didn't want this story to be out there because it was negative, defamatory, and embarrassing overall for his family. That's typically why hush money is paid, so-called hush money, is to avoid the embarrassment of the story, not to influence an election. So I think it's not crazy for there to be a juror out there who buys into this and says, whatever you may think about this, it's not a crime. And it's certainly not a felony. That's how I would rule if I was on this jury right now. And in fact, if you look at the betting markets say Trump is favored to be convicted here. But now it's only 75-25. The odds of Trump being found not guilty, I don't mean the entire jury agreeing. I think it's more likely, you might have heard Buck and I talking about this, that there would be a mistrial or that someone would refuse to convict. There is increasingly a decent chance, as the odds continue to climb, that Alvin Bragg's not even going to get a conviction in this case. And can you imagine if after all the lawfare, they even swing and miss on this garbage case, because Washington, D.C., South Florida, Atlanta, none of them are going to trial before the election. This is it. This is the one bite at the proverbial felony apple for Democrats, and it may not even work out. The only reason why Stormy Daniels should be allowed to testify is to try to go to what was the intent of the $130,000 payment that Michael Cohen made to her. Remember, what happened is not actually at issue here. There's no suggestion that any sort of sexual activity, to the extent it happened, is in question in any way. The only thing Stormy Daniels can testify to is how she was paid and or how her representative was paid. And maybe, if you really want to extend the scope of her testimony to why she believed that testimony, why she believed that payment occurred. Although I would argue that her belief as to why the payment occurred is not germane. The only thing that she has to testify about is potentially the intent of Trump in making the payment. And maybe, if you really want to argue whether the payment was made at all, although there's no dispute that I have heard about whether the payment was made. The sex act that allegedly occurred in 2006 is well beyond the purview of anything that this jury should be hearing. It's salacious, it's scandalous, it is attention-grabbing, but it isn't actually pertinent to the case at hand. It's, again, the analogy, which is an easy one to make because the New York Court of Appeals just tossed it, is this is not dissimilar from what happened in the Harvey Weinstein case. And so if you look at this, on its face to me, Judge Merchan should have to grant the mistrial because he allowed testimony that was incredibly salacious and incredibly prejudicial and not relevant to the alleged crimes to be heard by the jury. Now, the only defense that I could think he could provide is, oh, well, the defense didn't object enough to the testimony, but the defense objected to Stormy Daniels being allowed to be a witness at all. To me, this is flagrant grounds for a mistrial. And I think the New York Court of Appeals is going to grant it, but even Judge Merchan, far left-wing judicial activist that he is, this is not even a close call. Stormy Daniels should not have been allowed to testify about what she testified to. It has no bearing on the case itself, and it's incredibly prejudicial. And again, I went back and read the testimony myself. This is a glaring, basic level failure by Judge Merchan. And I don't understand how this is not grounds for a mistrial. This should have to be tossed. I bet today, now that he's had time to reflect upon it, Merchan is starting to recognize how egregious his error is. And if I were the Trump team, I would be slamming this argument like crazy. There has to be a mistrial granted. This jury heard incredibly prejudicial testimony about a sex act that has nothing at all to do with the actual underlying crime. Remember, what they're alleging is that this was a bookkeeping misdemeanor that they elevated to a felony. If I'm pretending that I'm the trial judge and I'm trying to be as generous as possible to the prosecution and allow Stormy Daniels to testify, the judge had to give an instruction that there would be no discussion whatsoever about the alleged sexual encounter. Maybe he could even read to the jurors that there's a dispute about whether or not it happened, which clearly Trump denies. She says it did. But the only reason that this is an issue at all is whether or not there was a second crime committed, as the prosecution has alleged, because there's no dispute that the payment occurred, and what the intent of the payment was. And I don't know that Stormy Daniels can even speak to the intent of the payment on the behalf of Trump, because to my knowledge, she never spoke to Trump. So she's testifying to her impressions of why the payment was made without any tangible, direct evidence of why the payment was made. Now, her attorney could testify because he was involved in the negotiations. I believe he already has testified. Michael Cohen could testify. But Stormy Daniels can't, because everything she's being told is hearsay. And again, this is very basic stuff. I don't know how skilled Merchan is as a judge. Maybe he didn't know what the testimony was going to be, but once he allowed it to occur, this is clear grounds for a mistrial. I think this is not going to be very much different than what happened with Harvey Weinstein. I think this whole case is garbage, and I think there are many grounds to overturn its very existence, purely from a legal perspective. But this feels to me like clear grounds of a mistrial. This thing is falling apart. You've got total misfit, loser, failures. Stormy Daniels, Fannie Willis, Jack Smith, Alvin Bragg, they're all tripping all over themselves. And for the prosecution, if your goal is to get a conviction, how in the world did they screw this up so significantly? You don't want to be even close to the line of whether or not there should be a mistrial granted. And again, did you benefit at all from anything that Stormy Daniels said? The Stormy Daniels story has been out there for what, like 8 years? Everybody's already heard this. I'm stunned by how incompetent this is from the judge and the prosecution. And again, it appears to me that the defense has clearly objected. When the judge says you didn't object enough to it, that's not a sign that you did the right thing. This case should be tossed, in my opinion, as a lawyer, to the extent I need to say that.